They called her the ugly daughter, a shadow among sisters whose beauty drew every eye. Where others glowed, Neela was mocked, whispered about, and dismissed as though her worth were nothing more than her face. Yet beneath the cruel laughter, she carried a heart woven with quiet strength, kindness, and courage unseen. When an Apache warrior arrived in her village, the people flaunted their loveliest daughters before him, certain of the choice he would make. But destiny rarely follows the crowd, and to his eyes, Neela was no shadow at all. She was the fire he had been searching for. The desert sun hung low in the sky, spilling amber light across the thatched rooftops of the village. Evening fires crackled to life, sending ribbons of smoke upward where hawks circled lazily in the last currents of the day. Women bent over clay pots, stirring cornmeal into thick porridge, while children darted between the huts, their laughter sharp and high-pitched as grasshoppers leapt from their path. In the rhythm of this ordinary life, one girl moved quietly, her presence almost swallowed by the noise and bustle. Her name was Neela, the second daughter of her family, though the village rarely remembered her as such. To most, she was simply the ugly one, the girl with uneven features, skin too dark from working long hours beneath the sun, and eyes that held a gravity others mistook for dullness. Her sisters, by contrast, were celebrated like blossoms in spring. Marissa, the eldest, had hair as black and smooth as obsidian, often braided with beads that glimmered when she walked. Alaya, the youngest, carried laughter in her every step and a smile that made even the oldest men soften with fondness. When visitors came or when the village gathered for feasts, it was these two who were dressed in woven shawls, perfumed with sage and wildflowers. Admired for their bright charm, Neela stood beside them, shoulders slightly hunched, hands folded tightly in front of her, as though she could shrink herself into invisibility. And in a way, she did until someone pointed her out. Why does she stand there like a crow among doves? One boy teased during a spring celebration. She frowns because she knows no warrior would choose her, another said. His words sharp enough to cut, though, spoken with a laugh. Even the women, though less cruel, often sighed and muttered under their breath. Her poor mother, they would say, shaking their heads. Two daughters blessed by the sun, and one touched by shadow. These words fell on Neela like pebbles tossed into water. They made ripples across her spirit, but she refused to let them sink her. She had long learned to bear the sting in silence, finding refuge in the tasks others overlooked. When the village children scraped their knees, she was the one to kneel beside them, tearing a strip from her own skirt to bind the wound. When the elders coughed through the night, Neela fetched herbs from the hills, grinding them into pastes and teas that soothed weary throats. She carried water, hauled firewood, and mended torn garments without complaint. Yet to most, these acts were invisible, swallowed by the shadow of her supposed ugliness. Her mother noticed, of course. At night, when the house grew quiet, she would place a hand over Neela's and whisper, "You carry a beauty no eye can measure, child. Do not let them blind you to it." But Neela only smiled faintly, too weary to believe it fully. It was in these moments alone, unpraised, that she spoke to the desert. She would walk beyond the huts, past the ring of mesquite trees, and sit upon the sun-warmed rocks. There, she let the wind tangle her hair and listened to the whisper of the earth. The desert, unlike people, made no judgments. Its beauty was raw, jagged, and unashamed. In its silence, she felt both small and infinite, as though perhaps her life carried meaning the others could not see, yet still. The laughter followed her. One afternoon, as preparations for the harvest festival began, her sisters practiced dances near the fire pit, twirling with woven skirts that fanned like petals. The boys gathered around, cheering them on, eager for their attention. Neela, meanwhile, was tasked with carrying baskets of maize to the storehouse, The load was heavy, pressing against her back, but she bore it steadily. As she passed, a voice called out, "Careful, Neela. If you drop it, the maze might turn as crooked as your smile." Laughter erupted, sharp and merciless. Her sisters didn't join in, but they didn't stop it either. Marissa simply rolled her eyes, as though embarrassed by Neela's very existence. While Alaya looked away, uncomfortable but silent, Neela kept walking. She felt the burn of shame rising in her cheeks, but her steps never faltered. Inside, however, a quiet ache deepened, as though every cruel word was carving out space in her chest. That night, as the village prepared for feasting and song, Neela slipped away to the desert once more. She lay on the sand, staring at the stars that glittered like shards of ice across the black sky. "Why was I made this way?" she whispered, her voice breaking into the stillness. "Why must beauty matter so much to them?" The stars, ancient and indifferent, offered no answer. But the desert breeze caressed her cheek like a mother's hand, and in that small comfort she closed her eyes. What Neela did not yet know was that her life was poised at the edge of change. For beyond the hills, a traveler was making his way toward the village, a man whose eyes were not fooled by surface brightness, who carried with him the weight of journeys and battles, and who searched not for a face to admire, but for a soul to walk beside his own in the days to come. The laughter of the village would echo differently in Neela's ears. What was once mockery would become the measure of their blindness, and what she had long carried in silence would be revealed as her greatest strength. But for now, she remained only the ugly daughter, unseen, underestimated, and mocked yet unknowingly, the heart of a story that would outlast them all. The next morning dawned sharp and clear. The desert sky stretched wide and endless, a canvas of pale blue painted with the faint brushstrokes of circling hawks. The village stirred to life with the rustle of grinding stones, the clatter of pots, and the smell of maize roasting over early fires. It should have been an ordinary day, yet whispers began even before the sun climbed high. A stranger was coming. Children were the first to spot him. They had been playing at the edge of the mesquite grove when they noticed a lone figure riding slowly from the horizon, where the land shimmered under the morning heat. They ran back, their small voices rising like birds. "A warrior! A warrior comes!" Soon, the entire village gathered in cautious curiosity. Men straightened their shoulders, gripping spears more tightly, while women whispered behind their hands. Strangers were rare in these parts, and rarer still to come alone. The figure grew clearer with each step of his horse. He was tall, his shoulders broad, his movements measured. His hair, dark as raven's wings, was tied back with leather strips, and his face bore the quiet strength of one who had walked many roads and seen many battles. Across his chest was slung a bow, and at his side hung a knife with a carved bone handle. His horse, though dusty from travel, carried itself with the same proud endurance as its rider. When he finally reached the circle of onlookers, he swung gracefully from the saddle. His boots touched the earth with a heavy finality, and for a moment silence fell. Only the wind sighed through the mesquite branches. The elder of the village stepped forward, his voice steady but welcoming. "Traveler, you come far. Who are you, and what brings you to our fire?" The man inclined his head in respect. "I am Dakota of the Apache," he said, his voice deep and even. "I seek only rest for the night and water for my horse. My path continues beyond your lands." At once the mood shifted. Relief softened the men's stances, and the women exchanged eager looks. An Apache warrior. His presence was both honor and intrigue. Warriors carried with them not only strength but also stories, and stories were treasures more valuable than gold. "You are welcome here," the elder said. "Our fire is open, and our food is yours." As Dakota tethered his horse, the younger women of the village rushed into action. They smoothed their hair, adjusted their shawls, and whispered quickly among themselves. His arrival was no ordinary event. An unmarried warrior passing through meant possibility, perhaps. Even a match that could bring status to a family. Marissa and Alaya, Neela's sisters, were no exception. That evening, as the village prepared a feast in honor of the guest, they adorned themselves with every charm they could muster. Marissa braided beads into her long hair, letting them catch the firelight like stars. Alaya wore a necklace of turquoise, her smile as bright as the stone itself. Neela, meanwhile, was asked only to help with preparations. She ground maize into flour, carried water from the well, and stoked the fires. Her mother wanted to dress Neela in her finest woven shawl as well, but her father shook his head. "Let the others be seen," he murmured. "We need not embarrass ourselves tonight." The word stung, though, spoken quietly. Neela lowered her gaze and said nothing. She had long learned that protest only deepened their disappointment. When the feast began, the villagers gathered around the fire pit, laughter and music filling the night. Dakota sat among them, his posture straight, his eyes steady as he listened to stories and shared some of his own. He spoke sparingly, but when he did, his words carried the weight of experience. He told of deserts farther than they could imagine, of rivers cutting deep canyons, of storms that swept the land like roaring spirits. The young women leaned forward eagerly, their laughter chiming at the smallest of his smiles. They passed him bowls of stew, cups of water, platters of roasted maize. Alaya danced for him, her steps light and quick, her laughter fluttering like a bird's. Marissa sang, her voice smooth and rich, her eyes never leaving his. The villagers watched with delight, certain of the impression being made, but Dakota's gaze often drifted subtly, quietly to where Neela worked in the shadows. She moved steadily between the pots and baskets, serving food, clearing bowls, offering water. No one else paid her much mind except to snap at her if she was too slow. Yet Dakota noticed the small things, how she bent low to comfort a child who had tripped, how she offered the elder the choicest piece of meat before taking her own, how her hands never stopped moving though no one thanked her. There was no artifice in her, no practiced laugh, no stolen glance to catch his eye. She seemed almost determined not to be seen, and that, more than all the charm surrounding him, caught his attention. At one point, when she brought a basket of roasted squash to the fire, Dakota caught her gaze. It was only for a moment, but he saw something there: depth, quiet strength, and a sadness that weighed like stone. Neela quickly lowered her eyes, retreating back into the shadows, but the image lingered with him. Later, as the fire burned low and music softened, Dakota rose. "I will rest now," he said, inclining his head. "You have shown me much kindness." The villagers murmured their farewells, though the young women hid their disappointment. Surely tomorrow, they thought, he would choose to linger with one of them. Surely tomorrow he would see their beauty more clearly. Neela, weary from her work, slipped away before the others. She walked to the edge of the village, to the quiet place near the mesquite grove where the stars burned brightly. She did not know that behind her, Dakota paused. Watching her silhouette against the night. To the villagers, she was invisible. To him, she was the only one who seemed real. The days that followed Dakota's arrival slipped by with an almost dreamlike rhythm. The villagers, eager to impress their guest, offered him every courtesy: food, rest, song, and company. Yet beneath their hospitality was a current of quiet anticipation. Everyone was waiting for the moment when Dakota would choose a companion, even if only for a short time. Neela noticed it too. She noticed the way her sisters lingered near him, the way the younger girls whispered behind their hands whenever he passed, the way even the older women adjusted their shawls and smiled a little brighter in his presence. She told herself it had nothing to do with her. Dakota was a guest. Guests always stirred such things. But still, she felt it, the prickle of curiosity. The strange pull in her chest whenever she caught sight of him. It unsettled her. So as always, she kept to the shadows. One morning, while the village prepared for the day's chores, Neela carried a bundle of herbs to the elder's hut. His cough had worsened overnight, and she had gone out early to collect fresh sage and chamomile. As she knelt to grind the leaves, a shadow fell across the doorway. She looked up, and there was Dakota, standing silent, watching her with those dark, steady eyes. Neela's heart stumbled in her chest. She lowered her gaze quickly, continuing her work. "The elder is ill," she said softly. "This will ease his breathing." Dakota stepped inside. He moved with the quiet grace of one who had spent his life in wide, open spaces, his presence filling the small hut without effort. "You care for him," he observed. Neela hesitated, unsure how to respond. "He has no daughter nearby." Someone must. Most would have dismissed it as duty. But Dakota's gaze lingered, as if he saw more in her words. "It is not easy to give when no one asks it of you." She glanced at him, surprised. No one had ever spoken of her tasks in that way. To her family, to the village, her work was invisible, expected, unremarkable. She searched his face for mockery but found none. Only quiet sincerity. Neela lowered her eyes again, cheeks warming. "It is easier than watching someone suffer," she murmured. For a long moment, Dakota said nothing. Then he nodded once and left as quietly as he had come. But the memory of his words lingered, like the faint echo of a drumbeat in Neela's chest. That evening, as the village gathered again by the fire, Neela remained in the background, weaving reeds into a basket. Her sister sat close to Dakota, their laughter ringing like bells. Marissa leaned forward, telling him stories of her skill in dyeing cloth. Alaya danced once more, her skirt spinning in the firelight. The villagers watched, certain the warrior was entranced, but Neela, though her hands never stopped moving, noticed something strange. Dakota smiled politely, listened with respect, but his eyes wandered. More than once, she felt the weight of his gaze flick toward her, lingering a heartbeat too long before returning to the bright company of her sisters. It unsettled her more than the whispers ever had. Later, when the fire had burned low and most had gone to rest, Neela carried her half-finished basket to the edge of the mesquite grove. She liked to work there, where the night was softer, the stars closer. She had just settled onto the ground when footsteps approached. She stiffened, turning, and found Dakota standing a few paces away. "I did not mean to startle you," he said. Neela shook her head, clutching the reeds. "The desert is wide. There is room for us both." Dakota lowered himself to the ground beside her, his movements unhurried. For a time, he said nothing, only watched her fingers move deftly, weaving the reeds into shape. The silence stretched, but it was not uncomfortable. Finally he spoke. "You work with patience," he said. "Every strand has its place." Neela gave a small, almost self-conscious laugh. "It is only a basket." "No," Dakota said, his voice low but certain. "It is more. You take what is plain and make it useful. That is a gift." Neela looked at him then, truly looked. His face was steady, his eyes reflecting the starlight. There was no trace of jest, no empty flattery. She felt her throat tighten. No one had ever called her work a gift before. She wanted to thank him, but the words caught. Instead, she lowered her eyes back to the basket, her fingers trembling slightly. The next day, Neela went to fetch water from the well. The jar was heavy, its weight digging into her shoulders as she carried it across the dusty path. She stumbled once, nearly spilling, and from behind came a burst of laughter. "Careful." Neela, one of the young men, jeered. "The jar is prettier than you are, don't break it." The group of boys roared with laughter. Neela's cheeks burned, but she kept walking, her grip steady. She had endured such jests her whole life. They no longer surprised her, though they never stopped stinging. What she did not know was that Dakota had been standing nearby, watching. His eyes narrowed and his jaw tightened. He said nothing then, but later, as he sat with the elder, he asked quietly, "Why did they mock her so?" The elder sighed, his cough rattling. Neela was not blessed with the beauty of her sisters. The young are cruel with their words. They see only the surface. Dakota frowned. Then they are blind. The elder studied him for a long moment, then smiled faintly. Perhaps. Or perhaps they have yet to learn what you already know, that beauty does not rest on the skin alone. Dakota said nothing. But in his heart, the truth was already growing clear. That night, the village celebrated again, this time with drums that echoed into the desert sky. Neela did her usual work serving food, keeping the fires steady, tending to children too small to sit still. Her sisters dazzled as always, drawing laughter and applause. But Dakota's eyes found her amid the crowd. The way she crouched to wipe a child's face, the way she studied an elder's cup, the way her smile, though faint, was genuine when she thought no one was looking. In those small, unnoticed acts, Dakota saw what no one else cared to see. A beauty deeper than adornment, more enduring than charm. A beauty rooted in compassion, patience, and quiet strength. And in that moment, beneath the pulsing rhythm of the drums and the flicker of the firelight, Dakota knew. The woman the village mocked as the ugly daughter was to him the most beautiful of them all. The morning of the harvest ceremony dawned bright, the sky a brilliant wash of gold and blue. It was the day the village honored the earth for its gifts, offering thanks with song, dance, and feast. Families prepared with care, painting their faces with ochre and ash, weaving feathers into their hair, donning their finest woven garments. This year, however, there was more than the harvest to talk about. Ever since his arrival, the village had buzzed with whispers. He had lingered longer than expected, joining in daily work, hunting with the men, and listening respectfully to the elders. Yet all eyes were fixed on one question: which woman would he choose? The villagers assumed his silence was not disinterest but careful thought. How could it be otherwise? A man like him would surely not leave without leaving a mark. And so, on the day of the ceremony, every family with daughters prepared as though fate itself was knocking at their door. Marissa and Alaya were radiant. Marissa wore a shawl dyed crimson with cochineal, her hair braided into an elaborate crown that shimmered with glass beads. Alaya, ever light-hearted, had adorned herself with flowers, her laughter carrying through the village like bells. Their mother fussed over them, straightening hems, adjusting necklaces, her eyes shining with hope. Naela, meanwhile, was given only simple tasks. Keep the fire strong, her father instructed. Make sure the children stay near the circle. He didn't say it outright, but Neela knew what he meant. Stay out of sight. Don't draw attention. And so, as the ceremony began, Neela sat near the back, her shawl plain, her hair loosely tied. She kept her gaze low, listening to the rhythm of drums and the voices rising in song. The feast followed the prayers. Platters of roasted maize, squash, beans, and venison were passed around. Dakota sat near the elders, his posture calm, his face unreadable. But everyone was watching him. Even the laughter seemed to bend toward him, as though the village itself waited for his decision. At last, when the food was nearly finished and the firelight glowed deep orange, the elder spoke. "Dakota," he said, his voice carrying over the crowd, "you have shared our fire, our food, our stories. We welcome you as brother. But now we must ask, do you leave us tomorrow as a guest? Or as family?" A hush fell. All eyes turned to him. The young women straightened, their mothers held their breath, and even the men leaned forward with anticipation. Dakota rose slowly, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the fire. He scanned the circle of faces, his gaze steady. "You have given me much," he began. "More than food, more than shelter, you have shown me your spirit as a people. For this I am honored." He paused. The silence grew heavy, hearts pounding in every chest. "But," Dakota continued, his voice firm, "I will not leave alone." A ripple of excitement surged through the crowd. Marissa's smile flashed like lightning. Alaya lowered her gaze demurely, though her cheeks glowed with anticipation. Mothers clutched their daughters' hands, whispering prayers. Dakota's eyes swept the circle once more. Then he spoke the words that struck the village like thunder. "I choose Neela." For a moment, no one breathed. The name hung in the air, impossible, unbelievable. Then came the gasps, the sharp intake of breath, the whispers swelling into disbelief. "Neela? The ugly one? He cannot mean it." Marissa's face hardened, her pride crumbling beneath shock. Alaya blinked rapidly, her smile frozen, her voice caught in her throat. Their mother's hands fell from her lap, her expression stricken with confusion. Even their father stared in silence, as though he had not heard correctly. Neela herself sat frozen, her basket of maize still in her lap. The firelight painted her face in gold and shadow, her eyes wide, her lips parted in disbelief. She had heard the words, but they seemed like a dream, something too wild to touch reality. Dakota stepped forward, his voice unwavering. "Yes, Neela, she is the one I choose. I have seen her spirit kind, patient, strong. She cares for the old and the young. She works without praise. She carries a fire in her that no beauty of face could ever match." His words rang clear, slicing through the murmurs like a blade. Still, the villagers could not contain themselves. But why her? Someone cried, "She is not fair like Marissa. She has no laughter like Alaya." Another protested. Kode turned his gaze on them, steady as stone. "Because her worth is not in her face, nor in her laughter, but in the strength of her heart. I do not seek a jewel to adorn my hand. I seek a woman to walk beside me, through storms and silence, through hardship and joy. Neela is that woman." The fire popped, sending sparks upward into the night. The crowd shifted uneasily, their disbelief mingling with awe. Neela, trembling, finally found her voice. You choose me?" She whispered, barely audible. Dakota's eyes softened. He stepped closer. His voice meant only for her, though all could hear. "Yes, Neela, from the first moment I saw you, I knew. You are the woman of my dreams, though you may not believe it yet." Her throat tightened, her chest filled with something vast and overwhelming. She had lived her whole life in shadows, mocked, dismissed, unseen. And now, before the entire village, this warrior had lifted her into the light. The silence that followed was heavy. Some still shook their heads in disbelief. Others exchanged glances, unsure what to think. But none dared speak further against Dakota, for his conviction was unshakable. At last, the elder raised his hand. "The choice has been spoken. We may not understand it, but it is his truth. And the truth of a man's heart is not ours to command." The crowd murmured, subdued. Marissa rose abruptly, her eyes blazing with wounded pride, and stalked away into the night. Alaya remained seated, her gaze lowered, tears glinting in her lashes. Their mother sat stiff and silent, while their father's jaw was clenched tight, torn between shame and powerlessness. Neela, still trembling, rose slowly to her feet. The villagers' eyes burned into her, some sharp with envy, others clouded with confusion. But when she met Dakota's gaze, steady and unwavering, she felt something new take root in her chest, something stronger than shame, stronger even than fear. For the first time in her life, Neela stood tall. The fire burned late into the night, but the songs and laughter were quieter, tempered by the shock of what had transpired. As the villagers drifted away, whispering among themselves, Neela and Dakota remained near the embers. "Why?" she asked softly, still unable to believe it. "Why would you choose me when all others are brighter, more beautiful?" Dakota reached out, taking her hand gently in his. "Because I see what they cannot. The earth is not always smooth. The desert is not always soft. Yet in its harshness, it holds a beauty deeper than flowers or jewels. You are that beauty, Neela, the kind that endures when all else fades." Tears welled in her eyes, not of sorrow, but of something fierce and luminous, a release of years of hidden ache. She lowered her head, letting the tears fall, while Dakota's hand remained steady around hers. And so, beneath the starlit desert sky, the choice was made. The village might scorn, might whisper, might never understand, but Neela's life had changed forever. For the first time, she was no longer the ugly daughter. She was chosen. She was seen. She was loved. The days after Dakota's declaration passed like restless storms. What should have been a season of celebration became instead a season of whispers. The village could not stop talking, though most did so in hushed tones, as though the desert itself might carry their words to the warriors' ears. "Why her?" they muttered. "Why the ugly one?" Mothers shook their heads in pity. Fathers clucked their tongues, muttering about the blindness of men. Young women, their pride wounded, turned their laughter into sharp-edged whispers whenever Neela passed. Even the children, always quick to echo what they heard, began to sing cruel songs and play. The crow with tangled feathers, the crow the warrior chose. Neela heard them. Of course she did. Each word landed like a pebble in her heart, heavy and stinging. She had thought foolishly, perhaps, that Dakota's choice might shield her from the cruelty she had endured all her life. Instead, it seemed to sharpen it. Where before she had been ignored, now she was resented. Where before she was mocked in shadows, now the scorn came openly, hot and biting. But there was one difference now. She was no longer alone. Whenever the whispers grew too loud, Dakota's presence silenced them. He was not a man of many words, but his silence carried weight. His gaze, steady as stone, could turn laughter into ash. Once, when a young man scoffed aloud, "Better a woman of beauty than one who hides behind shadows," Dakota rose to his full height and stepped close. "Beauty fades with the sun," he said, his voice low but unyielding. "But a strong heart endures through the storm. If you cannot see that, then you are still a boy." The young man flushed crimson and looked away, his bravado crushed. None dared mock Neela openly in Dakota's presence again. Still, the undercurrent remained. One evening, Neela sat by the fire, weaving another basket, her hands moving out of habit, though her thoughts were heavy. Across the village circle, she heard two women whispering. "He has bewitched himself," one said. "No, she must have bewitched him," the other replied. What else could explain it? Their words dug into her. Bewitched, as though she could only be chosen through trickery, never through worth. She lowered her eyes, shame flooding her chest. Dakota appeared then, carrying a haunch of venison from the hunt. He set it near the fire, his sharp ears having caught the whispers too. He looked at Neela, saw the slump of her shoulders, and spoke loud enough for all nearby to hear. "Do not bow your head, Neela," he said firmly. A woman who carries the burdens of others does not lower her gaze. She walks tall. The women who had whispered flushed and fell silent, their faces turned away. Neela's fingers stilled on the reeds. Slowly, she lifted her head. Dakota's eyes met hers, steady and certain, and something inside her straightened, like a sapling braced against the wind. But not everyone was so easily silenced. Her father, burdened by pride and wounded reputation, could not hide his bitterness. One night, as the family gathered in their hut, he spoke sharply. "You shame us," he said to Neela. "Do you not see? The village laughs behind our backs. Your sisters, what will become of them now? What warrior will look their way when the Apache chose? You?" Neela's throat closed. She wanted to protest, to say she had not asked for this, that she had not tricked fate into turning her way. But before she could speak, Dakota, who had been sitting quietly, rose. He looked her father in the eye, his voice like a blade cutting through the room. "It is not shame to be chosen for what is true. It is shame to measure worth by shallow eyes. Neela's value does not lessen your daughter's. It only reveals your blindness." The room fell silent. Her father's mouth opened, then closed. He looked away, his pride stripped bare. Neela stared at Dakota, her chest trembling with a mixture of fear and awe. Never had anyone spoken for her so boldly. In time, the whispers dulled. The villagers still talked, but softer now, their words losing power. For Dakota's conviction was unmovable, like a rock that no wind could shift. Every day, he showed his choice was no whim. He walked beside Neela, not her sisters. He sought her counsel when decisions were made, not the admired beauties. He shared his stories with her, listened to her voice, and treated her with the respect the others denied. And slowly, though none admitted it aloud, the village began to notice what he saw. They noticed the way Neela's hands were, always first to lift the burdens of others. The way her eyes softened when a child cried or when an elder faltered. The way her voice, though quiet, carried wisdom when she chose to speak. They noticed, too, the strength in her step, the resilience in her back, the fire in her spirit that hardship could not extinguish. The laughter grew quieter. The whispers turned uneasy. And little by little, silence replaced scorn. One afternoon, as Neela returned from gathering herbs, she found a small group of children waiting near her hut. They looked at her uncertainly, shifting from foot to foot. Finally, one of them stepped forward, a little girl with a scraped knee. "My mother says you can help." The girl said softly. Neela blinked, surprised. No one had ever sought her out before. Carefully she knelt, cleaning the wound, grinding the herbs into a paste, and binding the knee with a strip of cloth. The girl sniffled, then smiled. "Thank you." The others murmured thanks as well before scampering off. Neela watched them go, her hands trembling. It was a small thing, perhaps, but it was the first time in her life the villagers had come to her not with mockery, but with trust. Akeodea stood nearby, watching quietly. When she looked up at him, he only smiled. "They are beginning to see." Neela's throat tightened. She looked away quickly, but her heart swelled with something she had never dared hope for: acceptance. That night, as the firelight flickered and the drums beat low, the elder rose to speak. "Once," he said, his voice carrying through the circle, "we were blind. We laughed where we should have honored. We scorned what we did not understand. But a warrior's eyes have reminded us, beauty is not always in the face. It is in the spirit, in the strength that carries others, in the fire that endures." He turned to Neela then, his old eyes shining. "Forgive us, child, for the years we did not see you." A hush fell. No one moved, no one spoke. For in the elder's words was a truth they could no longer deny. Neela felt tears sting her eyes. She bowed her head, not in shame, but in gratitude. For the first time in her life, the laughter had ceased. The village was silent, not with scorn, but with respect, and beside her, Dakota placed his hand gently over hers, the warmth of it steady and sure. The desert morning broke with a pale light, soft and gentle after a long night of whispers and reflection. Smoke still curled lazily from the fire pits, and dew clung to the grass at the edge of the village. Yet something in the air felt changed, subtle, but undeniable. The laughter that had once clung to Neela's name like thorns had fallen quiet. In its place lingered a hush, as if the people were unsure how to shape their voices now that truth had been laid bare. Neela rose early, as always. Her hands moved out of habit, stoking the coals, grinding maize, fetching water. But her heart beat differently. For the first time in her life, she carried not only the weight of her tasks but also the knowledge that she had been seen, truly seen. She still heard the echoes of Tekoda's words, the way his voice had rung through the night. Her worth is not in her face, but in the strength of her heart. She touched her chest, where those words had settled like a flame. Tekoda found her by the well, filling a jar with water. He said nothing at first, only took the jar from her hands and lifted it to his shoulder as though it weighed nothing. Neela blinked, startled. No one had ever thought to ease her burdens before. "You do too much alone," he said quietly. Neela lowered her gaze, unsure how to answer. She had lived so long carrying what others cast aside that she did not know how to share the weight. But Tekoda's presence beside her felt less like intrusion and more like balance. As though for the first time, the earth beneath her feet was steady. That evening, the elder called the village together once more. His voice, though frail with age, still carried authority. "Tekoda has chosen," he said, his gaze sweeping over the gathered faces. "And his choice is not ours to question. We have been reminded of a truth we forgot, that beauty fades like petals in the sun, but strength and kindness root themselves deep and endure." He turned to Neela, who stood beside Tekoda, her plain shawl drawn around her shoulders. "Child, you have walked years beneath our laughter, and yet you never let bitterness take you. For that I bless you. May your steps beyond this village be strong, and may your spirit guide others as it has guided him." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some still looked away, unable to let go of their scorn. But others quietly, slowly nodded in agreement. A few even bowed their heads in apology. Neela's mother wept silently, torn between sorrow and pride, while her father sat stiff and wordless, pride cracked but not fully broken. Marisa stayed inside their hut, her beauty now shadowed by bitterness, while Alaya lingered at the edge of the circle, her eyes glistening with quiet envy. Yet neither sister dared speak against Tekoda's choice again. The ceremony ended not with laughter, but with stillness. And in that stillness, something shifted in Neela's heart. She no longer felt like the shadow among sisters. She felt like the dawn itself, quiet, steady, unstoppable. The next morning, Tekoda prepared his horse for departure. Word spread quickly. He would not travel alone. Neela would go with him, leaving behind the village that had never truly embraced her. Her mother clutched her hands before she left. "Forgive us, Neela," she whispered through tears. "Forgive me. I should have spoken sooner. I should have defended you." Neela, her own eyes wet, squeezed her mother's hands. "You gave me life, and that was enough. Do not weep. I will carry you with me." Her father stood apart, his jaw tight, his pride still wrestling with the truth. At last he said only, "Go then. May you find the happiness I could not give you here." His voice cracked despite himself, and Neela bowed her head in silent respect. When the time came, Tekoda lifted her onto his horse. She had never ridden before, but his arm around her waist steadied her. Together they rode through the village gates, the people watching in silence. Some whispered, some frowned, but others raised their hands in farewell. Naela did not look back. She had spent her whole life looking over her shoulder, measuring herself against others' laughter. Now, with Tekoda beside her, she looked only forward toward the open desert, the horizon blazing with morning light. The journey was long, stretching across dry plains, rocky hills. and riverbeds lined with cottonwoods. Neela learned to ride, to camp beneath the stars, to read the signs of the wind and sky as Dakota did. He taught her to shoot a bow, to track deer, to listen for the soft pad of coyotes in the night. And she, in turn, taught him the healing ways of herbs, the patience of weaving, the comfort of silence. Each night, as the fire burned low, they spoke not of vanity or shallow things, but of dreams, fears, and the weight of the world. Dakota shared his scars, battles fought and lost. Neela shared her wounds, the years of mockery she had borne. Together, they built not only companionship, but a bond woven from truth. In time, they joined his people. The Apache welcomed her with curiosity at first, but when they saw her skill in tending wounds, her patience with children, her quiet strength in the face of hardship, they embraced her fully. No one called her ugly. No one laughed. She was simply Neela, respected, valued, and loved. Years later, stories of Neela returned to her village. Travelers spoke of the Apache woman who healed the sick, who wove baskets so fine they seemed to hold water, who stood beside her warrior husband with a dignity that silenced crowds. The villagers who once mocked her now told her story differently. They spoke of how they had once been blind, of how a man from beyond their lands had seen what they could not. Some softened their hearts in shame. Others clung stubbornly to their pride. But all remembered her name. No longer the ugly daughter. No longer a shadow, Neela had become a woman of rare strength. Her legacy carved not in beauty that fades, but in the fire of spirit that endures. And every dawn, as the desert sun spilled gold across the horizon, Dakota would look at her, smile softly, and whisper the words he had spoken from the first, "You are the woman of my dreams."